Today's program of Cape Cod Arts and Beyond is brought to you by the voice studio of John Murelle, presenting high-quality vocal instruction for the serious voice student. His studio is located in East Sandwich on historic Route 6A. Contact Mr. Murelle today for more information or to make an appointment. The voice studio of John Murelle. Hey, welcome back to Cape Cod Arts and Beyond with John Murelle, your arts show from Bourne and Falmouth all the way down to Provincetown and Wellfleet and Truro. Today our guests are going to be Hilary Osborne and Doug Rugh of Osborne and Rugh Gallery in Falmouth. Also, I've brought back our author Mick Carlton, who has a new book that he's going to talk about. Cape Cod Arts and Beyond. Thanks for watching. In 2012, Hilary Osborne and Doug Rugh celebrated their 4th year at the Queen's Byway, the historic neighborhood of Falmouth, Massachusetts, near the Village Green on Cape Cod. Previously, the husband and wife team had separate studios at the Katamet Arts Center. In season, both artists create landscapes from the surrounding area and work on still lifes throughout the year in their gallery. Landscapes are created on location, and studio paintings are created from those paintings done in the field. Both Hilary and Doug believe that it is important for artists to study from life and on location to understand the visual nuances of ever-changing light and to develop a keen eye. Today on Cape Cod Arts and Beyond, we are at Osborne and Rugh Gallery at the Queen's Byway, what I call the entrance to Falmouth. Our guest today is Hilary Osborne and Doug Rugh, who have this beautiful gallery and studio. Welcome. So welcome, Hilary and Doug. Now I want to tell you, earlier this summer I was down with the show at the Provincetown Art Association Museum to see an exhibit by Robert Motherwell. It was called Beyond the Sea. Now, his artwork is known as abstract expressionism. And when I look around this gallery, which I think is spectacular, it doesn't look the same, right?
Right.
How would you, do artists define their work in a certain style? How would you classify your work?
That's a good question. I think that we look at our work as representing our environment.
Yes.
We see our surroundings and we're inspired by them, and we work from life. We're outdoors, painting the locations, and being inspired by nature. And that's where it comes from, our direct observations of looking at our environment.
Is that the same with you, Doug, do you think?
Yeah. Well, Hilary comes from a background of abstraction.
Yes.
And so, you know, it depends. People look at painting in different ways. You know, Hilary might think about the compositional, abstract element of the painting before she sets in on it.
Now, you said, I read somewhere that you like to paint outside to see the varying changes of light and color, and as the clouds come out or the sun comes out or the sun sets, and you feel an artist should develop a keen eye. Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, well, as landscape painters, we like to be out on the spot in nature, watching it change, and that's kind of the fun of it. You know, if you're just copying a photograph, it's just copying spots of color. But when you're outside, you're seeing the tides coming up, the clouds are moving, you get different effects, different lighting effects, and it's really about learning about all these things. So you're looking at the shoreline, and sometimes you see through the water as the clouds change, other times you don't. And so when we're outside, it's really, you know, doing these field studies, it's teaching us about the anatomy of all the different aspects of nature. So that when we come in the studio, then we can do larger paintings just out of our imagination, based on places we've been. So, so it's a process of being in, and that's the fun of it. You want the wind blowing on you. You want to be out in the elements.
You paint in the winter, right?
I do paint.
That's the elements, right?
That's
Did you ever
absolutely.
paint in a snowstorm?
Absolutely. I have one recollection of painting out in Katamet in a snowstorm. I was way out at Lawrence Island. I had to take all of my gear out and hike out. And it was clear when I had gone out, and then maybe half an hour into the painting, the snow started to come down. But I was so immersed in the process, I was really engaged in looking at the colors of the scene that I didn't even notice it. I was just painting away, and maybe about an hour into it, I started to feel that my feet were going numb and my hands were stiffening up, and I couldn't really get the paint to move the way I wanted to. But I was so inspired by the colors that I kept going. And it was a small painting, so I was able to manage getting away with an 8x10 and getting the basis of that scene down. But it was an experience I won't forget, because it was an unusual color of the scene, and I just found that you can't repeat those scenes in your mind. You can't get that experience from a photograph. You have to really experience it.
And that's a big part of it, is once you're inspired, if you're somewhere where you're inspired, the painting's halfway there.
Yeah.
Because you need to find those things that
Right.
as an artist.
One of my
attract your
favorite
eye.
artists, George Innes, he was known for saying that the true aim of art is not to imitate a fixed material condition, but to represent a living motion. So the idea is that we're not trying to necessarily take a photograph and copy a fixed material condition, but to represent nature that's constantly changing, constantly moving, and you feel alive, you feel a part of that environment when you're participating in it.
That's cool. That's cool. Yeah. As a musician, you guys both know that I'm a singer. It doesn't always happen, but when you're doing a performance or singing, you get in this thing known as a flow.
Yes.
Where all of a sudden, like, oh, it's an hour. It's been 2 hours. You have no idea. Yeah. Do you get that experience as an artist?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because you spend hours out there, but time goes by. And it's a race. When you're outside, it's a race to capture. Something comes and happens, and you got to remember that. Because it's not going to stay there and let you paint it.
I was lucky enough a few years ago to go to the south of France, and I think the town is called Collioure, where all the Impressionists is painted. It was beautiful, but, I am a real Cape Codder. I think the Cape is so beautiful.
It is.
Yeah,
It
absolutely.
is.
I mean, Falmouth is gorgeous, Chatham is beautiful, Wellfleet. I mean, it's a very beautiful place.
It
We don't
is.
have to look other places,
We don't.
do we?
And as a year-rounder, you get the change of seasons, and it's quite unusual to see snowfall on the ocean, to see ice caps form at the beach, to see the fall colors on the Cape, the change of the cranberry bogs. It's very unusual. The marshes turn this golden sienna color in the wintertime, and that's very rare. You don't see that. Most summer people don't get to witness
Right.
that, so it's...
And with the overcast, when it's overcast, you see the colors more vibrantly.
Yeah.
Everything, in the winter, those grays and russet colors, they feel luminous,
So you call this space your gallery as well as your studio, right?
Right.
So if I came in here off the street after having a cup of coffee at the Coffee Obsession, I would see someone painting often?
Yeah, absolutely. We take turns. We alternate in here. And it's really our studio. We call it a gallery so people know what it is. But it's our studio. And when you come in, you'll see things half done on the floor or on our easel, and they keep changing. And we find that a lot of times when we have something on the easel, people are more interested and want to know about it.
When you're working on it?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because they can see it.
I am not a painter, and I love art and painting, but I can't do it. So when I see you doing it, I've seen you do it, I haven't seen Hillary, I'm just fascinated to watch you. So I'm sure other people feel the same way. Like, I can look at that or look at this and say it's great, but that you actually change the color for the sky and stuff is amazing to me.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you realize how wonderful what you do is a gift, what you do is special?
Yeah, I think
we
it's,
enjoy it.
but I think it's true that perhaps having done it for so long, perhaps you forget, for somebody who's looking at it with, an untrained eye, you almost forget that. So you have to be reminded. And that's what's good about being open to the public, is you can constantly be refreshed by people coming in, especially kids coming in who have questions.
It helps us to be objective about it.
Right, gives us a different perspective.
I mean, do you get down on your work sometimes? Like, oh, I'm not doing... I mean, sometimes I just feel like I can't sing a song. And then all of a sudden says, "Oh my God, you're like, oh yeah, that's right, I know how to do
Yeah.
this."
Yeah.
Well, we're really spoiled because we only get positive feedback all day long.
Good.
I mean, it's in terms of job satisfaction,
Yeah.
you can't do better with it.
But if say you do go through a spell where you are having a difficult time and you are not being inspired, the nice thing about our setup is that we have each other. So I often find that if I'm not seeing something, Doug will come back with a painting that I just can't believe. I love the freshness of it, the colors of it, and I'm inspired by that piece, and I'll go out and try to see things in a fresh way. So it helps to have each other working at it.
What happens is here is only art lovers come in the door. You know, people who aren't interested don't come in, and we see people sometimes peeking in the windows, and then they come to the door and they won't come in.
Well, let me tell you about that. It's one of my things. I am sort of new to visual arts, and I love it. And I have no problem going to the MFA or the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. But I'm always a little nervous about going into a gallery because I'm simply not going to buy something. I mean, I could, but that's not what I want. But sometimes people, well, can I help you? And I feel like I'm like at Macy's, and I'm supposed to say, yeah, wear the slacks. How do you feel about people browsing and not?
Yeah, we want people to browse. I mean, we know most of the people that come in here aren't buyers, but they're art lovers, and you know, this is a labor of love for us. We didn't go into sales to make a lot of money. We do this because we love it, and when people come in and are interested in our work, that's part of the whole thing for us.
Yeah, we want to share our passion with people.
Paintings
Right.
and if we can talk about a painting and maybe explain what we see in it,
right?
You know, technically or why we think it works, I think it helps other people to see that. Helps people to appreciate it.
And I think that's what sets us apart in some ways from other galleries, is that we're actually working here, so we can give the viewer firsthand knowledge of a painting. We can tell them very specifically where it was painted, what it felt like to us, talk about the painting, talk about the framing, talk about our inspiration, and we share that because we love that. It's not necessarily to get people to buy paintings, but to share our love and our passion for creating
we
the
make a
visual arts.
special effort not to pressure people to buy. And actually, people have to ask us about a painting.
Oh, yeah?
We're not trying to say, you know, this is good for you, take it home.
Terrific.
Because if someone, the painting someone does end up taking home with them, if they love that painting, if it's perfect for them, that's our best advertisement.
Yeah.
And
Always.
so the last thing we want is for someone to have something they don't want.
Right.
Of ours.
Yeah. So this is your gallery. This is your studio. I think you present performances here also, right?
Yeah.
I think I performed here.
That's a great
You think of this as a gathering place in many ways. Didn't your mother give a lecture at one point?
Yeah, my mother did a book reading from
Yeah.
her book, and we've had piano concerts and
Stephanie
Lectures.
Miele performed here,
Yeah.
didn't she?
And I've given a lecture here before, classes here.
And you also do like music, art history lectures?
Art history
Tell
lectures.
me about that.
Yeah, well, one of my passions is also artists in history.
Yeah.
I'm very inspired by seeing what other artists have done, what's come before me, and so I really enjoy talking about historically artists who have inspired me, and I've given lectures in the past here, a small gathering, and really enjoy that because it's not, we're not isolated. We're always inspired by our surroundings and what's come before us. So I like to educate people too as to other artists in history that have been a wonderful inspiration for us.
yeah, we try and put on events that we're interested in. Like, you know, I wanted to hear you sing in here, and and we have we do the Jazz Fest, and
That's this week, right?
That's coming up this weekend.
Yes,
Yes,
good.
Looking forward to
Falmouth
that.
Jazz Fest. So, if I can't come to the gallery, I bet you have a website. What's your website?
oh yeah, it's osborneandrughgallery.com. There's no E in Osborne. Rugh is RUGH.
But I bet if I did a Google.
Or you can just do our name.
Okay.
HillaryOsborne.com, DougRugh.com.
And you're closed what? When?
Monday, Tuesdays.
Monday, Tuesday. And generally, when you're open, one of you will be here.
Yeah, definitely.
And you'll sign autographs.
Yeah.
All right. Hey, you guys, thank you very much
Thank
you.
for
Thank you.
submitting
My
to
pleasure.
an interview. If you haven't had a chance to come to this beautiful gallery and studio, please. You can see it from the video, but being in here, it's just a beautiful event. Thanks a lot. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, folks, it was a very busy summer on the Cape. Some of the highlights of my visiting was the College Light Opera Company's production of South Pacific, the Cape Cod Theater Project in Falmouth. I was a fan of the Wellfleet Harbor Actors Theater in Wellfleet. I particularly liked references to Salvador Dali Make Me Hot and their original musical, The Consequences. Both were fabulous. In Provincetown, I was regular at the Broadway at the Art House series. I'll tell you, I saw people like Faith Prince, Megan Mullally, Patti LuPone, Judy Kuhn, Alice Ripley, all narrated and performed by Seth Rudetsky. It was a terrific evening every time. Also, at the Provincetown Art Association and Museum, there was the Beside the Sea, Robert Motherwell, an exhibition of all his works. Now this fall, I've already seen some few things. The first thing I'd like to tell you about is the Simon Sinfonietta, performed at the Falmouth Academy, and the music director and conductor was Stephen Simon. Highlights was the Mozart Symphony No. 36 in C major and the Saint-Saëns Piano Concerto No. 2 in G minor with Donna Kwong as the soloist. A week later, the Cape Cod Symphony began their season with a performance called Gallery of Greats. Very interesting performance and very high quality by the music director Jung Ho Pak. Voices at the Gallery was a symphonic piece by Stephen Polis with narrator by Eric Horn. And the highlight of the performance was Prometheus, Poem of Fire by Alexander Scriabin and pianist Alan Nyman. The Cape Cod Symphony brought in a lighting designer and created a light show for this performance. Quite interesting. Now folks, if you missed the Robert Motherwell exhibit, or if you didn't and want to see something else, let me tell you about their latest exhibit. It's starting right now. The painter is called Taro Yakamoto, a Japanese painter, and who worked with Hans Hofmann, part of the Provincetown Art Association. Look at some of his works and come on down to Provincetown and see some of the art.
Mick Carlton is well into his third decade as a public school English teacher at both the high school and middle school levels. When not grading papers, he can be found driving his wife, Lisa, and daughters, Hannah and Sarah, crazy with his incessant playing of jazz CDs. Jazz musicians are among America's most fearless artists, and if young people will only give the music of artists such as Louie Armstrong a try, they will make an enriching friend for life. Mick's first children's novel, Riding on Duke's Train, is about a boy's adventurous traveling with Duke Ellington and his famous orchestra. Mick Carlton.
Hey, well, it was about a year ago today, I looked at my calendar, when I had my guest, Mick Carlton, on for the first time. At that time, Mick had just come out with a book called Riding the Duke's Train. Is that right? What's it called?
Riding On.
Riding on Duke's Train. Well, a year has gone by and a new book has come out. Travels with Louie, also by Mick Carlton. So welcome, Mick. And first of all, tell us, who was Louie Armstrong, and I guess why did you decide to write about him?
First, thanks for having me, John.
Yep.
Second of all, Louie Armstrong, which I never realized growing up. To me, he was the old man who smiled and had a handkerchief and sang with a gravelly voice. And he'd be on the Ed Sullivan Show, the Mike Douglas Show. It was only later, because I loved his music as a kid, it was only later I began reading about him. Some musicologists consider him the most influential, revolutionary musical figure of the 20th century.
I heard that.
Not only as a musician, but as a vocalist as well. As a musician, he was the first to break away from the ensemble and play improvised, recorded solos.
Okay.
Now, we know from letters back in the day that Mozart, Beethoven, Bach, they would play improvised solos at parties as kind of a party trick.
Yes.
But of course, in those centuries, you didn't have the way of capturing it. Louis Armstrong came along at a time, the early 20th century, when we did have the technology to capture it. So he is the first to play improvised recorded solos that we have been able to capture on disc, which made jazz go from an ensemble music. Early New Orleans jazz is all the instruments playing at once and weaving in. Louis made jazz into a soloist art. Some say he also taught the world to swing. He was the first to play with that beating rhythm that later became known as swing. So as an instrumentalist, he revolutionized music. But then as a vocalist, he also was the first to sing. And again, we're not talking singing on the front porch, but on record. He was the first to sing in natural voice. You listen to some of the white pop singers of the 20s, these guys sound like their underpants are on too tight. That kind of a Rudy Valley voice. Louis sang in a down-home, funky, gravelly voice that really was the precursor to Bob Dylan, Lou Reed, you name it. He also influenced singers like Bing Crosby. Bing Crosby said, "It was Louis who made me realize, loosen up and sing in a more natural voice." So vocally and instrumentally, the guy revolutionized 20th century music.
And he was an entertainer. He was in 30 films?
Oh yes, at least.
Yes.
Oh yeah, it's funny. I'm good friends with a man named Jack Bradley, who knew Louis intimately for a long, long time. Louis would call Jack my white son. And Louis was aware that he was an artist. You know, he didn't live ignorant of that fact. He knew he was a supreme artist, but he also felt that he owed everything, his livelihood, he didn't have to, you know, work in a coal cart in New Orleans anymore. He owed that to his audience. So he was there to please them, to make them happy. So it was art in his mind, but it wasn't art apart from entertaining people.
Okay, interesting, interesting. Your book, Travels with Louie, it's specifically written for adolescents, is that correct?
The earlier book was marketed more towards the middle grades, say grades 6, 7, perhaps 8. This book is being marketed more towards young adult, which would be, you know, 8th, 9th, 10th, and even 11th grade. 3 high schools in New Orleans have picked it up for their 9th grade classes. But, and not to brag, but adults who have read it have told me that they really, really enjoyed the story.
Well, that's one of my thoughts. You know, there's a lot of adults that have spent their time sort of raising a family and you know, building a life that I think of myself that way, is I missed on certain parts, and when things calm down, I want to catch up. And you specifically, because of our work with Duke Ellington, have really turned me on to jazz and also vintage jazz. And I feel like this is a great book to read even as an adult, even though I can tell clearly it's not written for my voice.
No.
So you think that adults could read it as well?
Yeah, I've been told yes. And what I've tried to do, I've been reading about Louis Armstrong my whole life. My father was a jazz fan, so the music was always in the air. I've been reading about him. I've read the 2 books he wrote. He was a magnificent writer with his own voice. He traveled everywhere with a typewriter. He would type 15, 16, 17-page epic letters to people he had just met and friends. He loved to write. I've read all the interviews. I feel like I've captured his voice. But I have a secret weapon on my side, Jack Bradley.
Exactly.
Jack knew him personally. I've known Jack now for 20 years, so I've asked Jack questions such as, how would Louis react to racism? And Jack would say, if it happened to him personally, he was very philosophical. He would say, for example, that cat just doesn't understand yet what life is about.
Sure.
But when it happened to somebody else, like the Little Rock Nine in 1957, when the governor of Arkansas brought in the National Guard to keep these 9 black students out of Central High, Louis hit the roof. Hit the roof. He gave an interview that was syndicated in '57, calling President Eisenhower gutless. He was ready to go on a State Department tour of Eastern Europe, and he said, I'm not going. He said, I'm not doing this. They tell me about my country. What am I supposed to say? But when it happened to him, he was very, very philosophical. But with others, he'd get furious. Quick story. Louis met the Pope. I believe it was around '59. And the Pope wanted to meet Louis. And, you know, he was honored to meet the Pope. And that was in Italy. A week later, Louie was in Connecticut going to another one-nighter. I forget if it was either New Haven or Hartford. Louie had to use the restroom, so he asked Jack to pull over. Remember those days where you had to ask the owner of the restroom for a key to get in? Louie asked the owner. Owner said, well, Mr. Armstrong, I know who you are. By that time, Louie had been on the cover of Time magazine. He was already famous for close to 35 years at that point. I love your music, but I don't allow colored people to use my restroom. So Louie walked back to the car, and Jack said, what's wrong? And Louie said, you know, a week ago, I'm meeting the Pope in Italy because the Pope wants to meet me, and in my own country, I can't even pee? And Louie just shook his head and he said, that guy just doesn't understand what life is about yet. Wow. So he was very philosophical when racism came his way, very angry when it happened to other people.
Amazing. Jack Bradley, does he live on the Cape?
Yes, he lives in Harwich, He's been on the Cape for quite a while. And because Jack settled here from New York City around 1975, 76, a whole slew of jazz musicians followed him.
Okay.
Dave McKenna,
right.
Bobby Hackett, Ruby Braff. So Jack was kind of like the anchor who first came down here, and all these other jazz musicians came. Jack isn't he isn't a musician, he's a photographer.
Oh, he is.
But he was Louie's photographer and Louie's road manager.
Wow, wow. A quick synopsis. Tell people who might be interested in this book,
okay.
What's happening in it?
Got a young boy named Fred. Fred lives with his dad. Fred's father lost his wife to cancer. You know, naturally, little Fred has lost his mother. It's been 3 years. They're doing the best they could do. And for his whole life, Fred's father has known Louie, because Louie was childhood friends with little Fred's grandfather, who the boy never knew. He died before he was born. So basically, Louie has been looking after the family financially, emotionally, for support since the father was a little boy. So to little Fred, Louie is a grandfather figure / teacher. Little Fred wants to be a musician as well, and Louis is his teacher, and who better to have as a trumpet teacher than Louis Armstrong. But Jack would tell me this too. On the first of every month, Louis would mail out a stack of envelopes about that thick, and inside would be checks to either friends or the widows of friends who had just never made it financially, and Louis basically was paying their rent, their mortgage, their groceries. I've spoken to many people who have known the man, and the word angel comes up quite a bit. So here's a man who is a supreme artist, but also a real superior human being.
Wow, terrific.
Yep.
Did you know that Louie Armstrong lived in Queens?
Yep.
Did you know he lived in Corona?
Corona, Queens, 107th Street. I did know that.
I know you did. You're going there, right?
Yes, I'm going to be doing a signing at the Louie Armstrong House Museum in
There's
February.
a museum.
It's now one of the most visited museums in New York City.
You're kidding.
No, you walk into every room. It's been put together to look exactly like it did when Louie lived there. And when you go into every room, you hear his voice speaking to you from unseen speakers. Now, this is what I've read. I've never gone, but I'm dying to go. And the photograph on the book, that's Louis on the steps of his home with some neighborhood boys. He was a millionaire, and he easily could have lived in some Long Island mansion, but he loved his brick home in Queens. He loved the neighborhood. He would treat the local kids to ice cream. He liked his local barber shop. Interesting story about the photograph. It was that photograph that gave me the idea to write the book in the first place.
I see.
And my publisher, Leapfrog Press, they didn't know this. And when they showed me various examples of what the cover could be, this was one of them. And of course, I chose the photograph that gave me the idea to write the book.
Terrific, terrific. So if I want to get the book, I probably can get it at Titcombs and Sandwich.
You can get it at Titcombs and Sandwich. You can get it at Market Street Books in Mashpee Commons, Books by the Sea in Osterville. I know Barnes & Noble has some copies as well. But
what about Amazon, right, of course?
Yes, of course. Okay. But I like to support our local bookstores
Me too.
myself.
Yeah. Hey, anything coming up after this? Is there another book?
I've been asked by my publisher and Jazz at Lincoln Center, who's now adopted both books, to keep on writing these. And I'm thinking of the character Danny from Duke's Train a couple of years down the road. So that's my next book.
So we'll see you in a year from now on
Hopefully,
Cape Cod
John,
Arts.
hopefully.
Hey, Mick, thanks for coming in. Best of luck with Travels with Louie. And we'll look forward to the next book.
Thank you very much, John.
Thanks. Hey, folks, that was our show for today. I hope you enjoyed Hilary Osborne and Doug Rugh of Osborne and Rugh Gallery, and that very interesting author, Mick Carlton. Please, let me know if you like the show. Check us out on Facebook. If you have any questions about the show or anyone you think would be a good guest, please get in touch with me. And again, I'll see you next month on Cape Cod Arts and Beyond with John Murelle.